All right, so the chapter just came out, and I don't have a lot to say on the previous chapter, and part of it is because it read really fast, and I didn't think that the Merc phobia fight was going to be that long, just because it didn't seem like they had a lot of resources in terms of like how many people there for it to be like a realistic fight of like how, not like, oh yeah, they could defeat Merc phobia, but like how are they going to figure out, you know, a way to do it. I figured it was going to be one of those types of scenarios where they end up getting, you know, they pretty much just, because mercphobia in that state isn't at his full mental capacity, that he would end up attacking the Lacrima, like they would bait him into doing it and then he would destroy it. It makes sense because one, he doesn't seem to be, again, at his full mental capabilities, but he also didn't seem very hostile. And that was one of the things that was about the chapter I thought was really interesting of his demeanor. Obviously, he was like attacking back, but it wasn't even close to what we saw in Ermina. Even when he was still kind of just warming up with the Fairy Tail members, he was still way more hostile than what he was here. And to me, it seemed like in his mindset, because he went to go and eat Lucy, that it was really, he looked at her as more of prey, because obviously you're not going to try and just pulverize your food and rip it apart. I believe he was trying to legit, like, the idea he was trying to hunt his food at the lowest level possible. And Lucy was only able to do it because she ended up swinging him into the Lacrima. Whereas, like, if she swung him into anything else, it wouldn't have done any damage, but this is a giant dragon slaying thing. And on top of that, the second that she broke it, he was fine. And the thing about that too is, through this chapter, we saw mercphobia was relatively fine. I'm very curious though of like some of the mechanics, and I'm guessing we're going to be seeing that soon, but that's going to be part of like the question, because the name of the chapter for this current one was it Linked by Water, I think. Let me look, double check. Yeah, Linked by Water. And there was like the whole thing right before it went over to Natsu and Brian about how mercphobia and Aquarius seem to know each other. And my bigger takeaway from what was happening in like when Lucy got there, in how her and Brandish and their interactions, mercphobia, and something with the Aquarius key, I believe personally that it's going to be a reason that mercphobia wasn't as aggressive, because you could say that, okay, well, Aquarius is as like magic in the water in the Lacrima maybe messed with the way that the Lacrima is supposed to work, and mercphobia, again, instead of being as hostile, was like an animal and that just was trying to get his food. I'm trying to figure out my dog chewing super loud. Yeah, let me see. A little bit. He's over there hanging out. But that would to me is more interesting, because I wonder, I want to know how the way of the manipulation on the dragon gods works, because at least for mercphobia, he wasn't nearly as aggressive as he was, like I said, in Ermina when we saw him before. And I wonder, it's like, is this just because of like how it's going to affect all of them, or is it something from the Aquarius key? Because we know that there are ways that like you can have like memory transfers through mediums of magic that are strong enough, especially for people that are high enough attuned into said elements. And it's like you have Dragon God of Water, Aquarius, you have the Spirit of Water, and we saw it with when she as her ice shell form melted and went into the sea, and then was able to access part of her memories just being in the ocean, because her mom is part of the ocean at that point. So there's my question is like, did the key being in the Lacrima affect Merc somehow, or is it going to be more so it makes them again act more kind of protective of the Lacrima, but more of it being like, oh, it's their territory, and again more like animals? But I don't think so, just because I'm honestly believe that the mercphobia thing is going to come into play here, and I'm very curious as to what Mishima is planning with, just like, oh, what's the connection between Aquarius and Merc? I mean, obviously, like, he's the dragon god of water, and she is the celestial spirit that governs water. As far as we know, there's no other spirits like that has a higher grasp on water, and I don't think there are any other types of general creatures that attune into water, because like she's the water spirit, and she's just kind of naturally like is tied to water, but mercphobia is just like the pinnacle of a species that is tied to water. So it's a little different, but it makes sense that they would know each other. But at the same time, like, this is one of those things where it would, I don't think it would ever need to come up in conversation, because one, maybe she doesn't know that he is the dragon god. Maybe she just thinks that he's like some high adept water person, but also like I don't know when she would ever want to like have a time to bring this up. You know, we also don't know what the whole thing is with like, does he say like, you know, don't talk to people about me, or like kind of like hush kind of like conversation, because the dragon gods are kind of trying to be at the time on the low. There's a lot of stuff in there I don't think really matters too much. Like Aquarius just randomly at some point, did you guys know I know a dragon that hangs out in the North Continent somewhere in the sea? It's like I don't think that's really relevant, other than like saying dragons exist at some point. But like at the same time, I feel like she has no point of reason just to show up and talk to them about it, nor does she like ever want to talk, like hang out and talk to them. And again, it's not their business. So this is one of those things where we'll probably get some in-depth explanation in the next couple chapters, because Mishima he showed us the whole fight with Merc and like that whole confrontation and conflict. I think that the whole thing is going to be that the key was able to keep Merc from not being fully, again, like lethally hostile against Lucy and Brandish, which let them end up figuring out how to destroy the Lacrima, and that's going to end up being the key to their victory, essentially, because now they have a dragon god on their side. I still believe that Merc is not going to be at his full powers, because I believe that he was only able to be where he was at because of the Lacrima, and there's something blocking his ability to maybe be at full power. I don't know. We still don't really have confirmation of what happened with his powers, because he seemingly got him back and got his dragon form when the Lacrima was going on. So that's still an unknown thing that we just haven't gotten back to. Maybe we'll find out soon. But it's, to me, from where I can just look at what we're presented with so far, and I just believe that Mishima wanted to get through this part for like first, because it's going to be important. And I think that as a plot point, it makes sense for something like, oh yeah, something like, oh, Aquarius's key is a problem, or not a problem. It, because of its sacrifice and events leading up from everything between Tartarus to now, is that this was able to be here and be in this situation because of what happened in Tartarus and Lucy destroying the key. And I always like when you have stuff like that in a story, because it does really well full circles, as well as it ties in well just based off of like obviously the set elements. And I know a lot of people assume that Ermina and Mercphobia was going to have some tie to Aquarius's key. I just want to know what the links are going to be there, because I feel like there's going to be some good world building in there, but there's probably going to be one of those bits of information in the plot that is important. That now my other dog's, he's hanging out too. He's over there. He found his toys. Dude, I'm busy. But Ready, come here. Come here. We're doing a review right now. Come here. Listen, we're talking about dragon guards right now. We don't have time for dogs. I'm just kidding. He's gonna get this back as soon as this video's over. Don't worry. I'll even prove it. I'll give it to him by the end of this video. Just, you have to listen to the end of the video to know if my dog got his toy back, though. But with that, I think that'll be why when we get to the other Dragon God scenarios, it's going to be a completely different tone. But I think it'd be really cool if we got one of the Dragon Gods, like Mercphobia, to go into a scenario where it's like, oh yeah, we have, like, one, I would like to see the members of Rathian Sex show up, as well as the members of Fire and Flames, because those are like the wild cards here. I want to see kind of really flip the table when it comes to the current ongoing events. But I also want to see the other fights and what's going on with the other areas of the story and what other characters are up to. because I think it'd be really cool if we say we got to like Alderaan, we got through some of the other fights, and it seemed like, oh yeah, how are we gonna get into this, like a win for this, and then Mercphobia is able to show up and we have like an Alderaan versus Mercphobia fight. I think that would be really sick. I think it'd be really cool too, because it would be, Alderaan would have the advantage elementally, and you can have it so like the other characters do support things for Merc, but we have like a really cool center Merc fight. Because that would make sense too if like we had like, oh, Mishima didn't want to have a long fight with him because they were going to do something with him at a point soon already. And I like how I personally, I think that we'll have a little bit better of a fight with Viernes coming up. I don't expect to be like, yeah, it's going to be a 3-volume fight. I'm hoping we just get like more of Viernes' personality, hopefully a human form, or like maybe we get Duke's like cool form summoned back and Viernes is behind him like a stand, but something like that I think would be pretty cool. Just I want to see what different styles he's got, but I really liked just the way that this chapter kind of set things up for what I believe will be kind of like the later turning points of this arc, because I think that with Mercs on our side, that's going to be a huge plus to victory, even though right now I think he's still going to be nerfed just from the events of fighting the EFD Natsu back in, or I mean, way earlier in 100 Years Quest. But after that point, I mean, with, like I said, with the stuff with Aquarius and Merc, I feel like that's just going to be really cool into some lore, and maybe we find out a little bit like Celestial Spirit origins for like the main keys. But I don't really know what it's going to do for anything like large scale of what's going on, but we could, you know, maybe something about Merc's past will end up leading into what's going to happen forward. But Natsu versus Brian, I gotta give Brian props. See, my dog, he's hyped up. He's a Brian fan, apparently. He's a German Shepherd, so he likes to put stuff in his mouth. Maybe that's why he likes Brian so much. And Brian actually did way better than I thought he would. And one thing I was like reading the chapter, because like he ended up getting up from a purgatory slashing dragon fire, and I was like, for a second, I was like, the power scaling on that is going to be crazy, but never mind, because I remember Natsu's in base, he's not using Dragon Force, but this should just really cement clearly that the strongest attack that Natsu has in base, that, you know, it's the strongest attack he has. So in his base form, this just means that Brian is really the pretty much like solid to be able for Natsu to go into his later stages. I think that he should be fine pushed into Lightning Flame Dragon mode and start to really like progress in his dragon form, but I really don't believe Natsu needs Dragon Force in order to beat him, like Fire Dragon King mode at like medium difficulty, because I very much believe right now that Brian is showing the bar of where we're going to be seeing this. Maybe not the bar, because Raj is probably going to be back, and I feel like with Brian already had a pretty decent display already, and now he's got like regeneration, and he's like spitting teeth or something at Natsu. I wasn't too sure what that attack was. I think he spit all his broken teeth and then regenerated new teeth, which I think is actually kind of cool. It's just an upgrade for him, and it's like not even like a crazy like weird idea of a power, just because it's like, oh yeah, with certain creatures and like animals stuff, they can regenerate their, or just regrow their teeth way faster. And then obviously with like dragons have degrees of regenerations that we know of. It just makes sense he'd be able to do that, especially with like it already being what he was like in his magic beforehand, and then getting upgraded through being dragon like buffed. He's just at a higher stage, but with his weird hand mouth magic. I'm curious of when we're going to get some form of explanation of what his magic is exactly, because they were recruiting fire wizards, and clearly he can use fire, but we know like he can eat somebody else's fire and then spit it back out. But like, what exactly is his magic that it has fire, but it has this other thing with like obviously the big weird hands, or is fire just a trait of it? And I don't know. I'm very curious as to some, because with like Raj, it's like, oh yeah, Raj has a fire that seems to be like whatever his power level thing is, but it's not super potent. It's that he traps you in illusion, and then it's like a slow burn, and you just are kind of stuck in it, and you get defeated. And Leica just, he's a fire make wizard. He's got the complete, like, near infinite essentially options for him. It's all just determined and limited by his imagination as a maker wizard. But with, Wed's his own guy. He's got a great sword. He's awesome. But with, the Signaria sisters are weird. We can't really talk about them because we don't really know what exactly their actual power is. Alchemy just seemed like an additional thing they gained. But with Brian, his mouth thing seems to be the primary, and then everything else just seems to be more of like retaliation effects. I really want to know how he works, because it's like, is he a mouth dragon, or is it like a fire mouth dragon? Like a flaming maw dragon actually sounds pretty cool, like just this weird fire dragon variant. Also, we saw Misfortune in this chapter, and she apparently could not get turned into a dragon, which is very interesting, that we now have this belief that like a dragon or an exceed can't become a dragon. And I wonder about that. I wonder if it's maybe just this process, maybe it's only designed for one way, or if it is just like dragon slaying magic isn't designed for an exceed to be able to do it, so it wouldn't alter them. Which again is really interesting. If you've read the Happy spinoff, because Happy, like, it's just a side thing, Happy essentially gets like the Infinity Gauntlet and the Infinity Stones, Infinity Gems, if there's like a secret Marvel elitist in the audience. But he ends up becoming like, he models himself after Natsu. He's a happy dragon slayer, so he absorbs essentially happiness, and that makes him more powerful. And it makes you wonder, it's like, technically in that moment, is it more of like he's in the concept of the idea, or is he literally like he's using a temporary in this power up dragon slaying magic that makes him a dragon that is powered off of happiness? But Happy ends up getting taken away by Misfortune in this, and I'm wondering what exactly we're gonna have with that. It's like, is Happy gonna have a little mini fight? Because the Happy spinoff, at least from what we saw and what we know, there's nothing that contradicts the story, but it's like, I don't think that any of it is going to ever show up in the main story. It's like Happy got isekai'd into another dimension, into like an alt reality, and ended up like doing this whole thing there, and then at the end of the story he got brought back and he reunites with Natsu. And it's like, as far as we know, that story is canon, but nothing in it is probably ever going to be used in the canon. I will be really surprised if Happy pulls out the whole Heartwing power-up that he had in the story. I think it'd be really cool, personally. I really like the idea of Happy having a kind of like niche little thing he does. What is it? Buster Keel. Because I know there's like always those like animal mascot stuff. I wish they were more utilized. Was it Buster Keel? If you've ever read Buster Keel, I always thought that they did it pretty well. I liked that whole story. I don't want to spoil too much if you haven't read it, because there'll be at least one person that goes and checks it out. But like, I've always wanted Happy to have his own kind of thing. And I know there's Plu in Rave Master, but Plu doesn't have any serious fights. Plu's his own man. But I'm very curious as to what's going to happen with Happy and Misfortune, and what that little mini battle is going to happen and go down about. But Natsu ends up like hitting Brian around, and I really liked when he was like doing this whole bit about like, well, you kind of screwed yourself up in becoming a dragon, because Natsu is a dragon slayer, which, I mean, it's always funny, because I run into one of those people every once in a while, and they think that dragon slaying magic only works on dragons, and it's like, Natsu didn't fight a dragon for so long in the series, and you think that all these guys are just getting beat up for no reason. But obviously he can damage him. It's more of like, Brian is not, I feel like, educated enough on the idea of being a dragon and being, fighting a dragon slayer. Because normally with other people's magic, yeah, he should be way better off, but Natsu should, as a dragon slayer, can just damage him with his normal attacks. And Brian, I don't know, I kept having moments where I was like, okay, he's done, and then he keeps getting back up and being fine. And on top of that, I would imagine that he's going to progress in his dragonification form. I'm hoping that he does. The Natsu has to kind of push himself a little bit further, because I really like this fight as like a really just Natsu's having like a. I'm trying to think of like another series. For example, this first I was thinking like, what's another good shonen? First thing I thought of was Bleach. And there's like, what is it, like very early into the 1,000-Year Blood War, Ichigo fights Kurgeopi, and I'm trying to remember if that's the official pronunciation and spelling. Either way, you know who I'm talking about. Kilgay, Kurge, whatever. The jailer. He ends up fighting him, and that's actually a really solid fight in the earlier portions of the series, or not series, of that arc. And I'm feeling that right now with Brian versus Natsu, because it's been pretty solid so far. All it really needs is Brian to have like, some exposition where he says, "Oh, I'm gonna explain my power, and then here's my power buff with being a dragon now." And he gets like slightly bigger. His design gets a little bit cooler. Natsu starts to be like, okay, busts out lightning flame dragon mode, does some stuff with that, realizes that's enough, puts out fire dragon king mode. Maybe that's gonna be just enough as he like ends up defeating him. I want it to be like where Natsu doesn't like just no diff this dude or low diff him, but I don't want it to be like he really needs to push everything, unless like Mishima really wants to make Brian and like all the fire and flames full dragons like really powerful and like really emphasize on the increase, which is always a possibility. I feel like it just depends on how far Brian gets in his dragon form. If he gets full dragon, Natsu might probably need Dragon Force, but I don't feel like it's going to be the ones like Natsu needed 100% of his power in order to defeat this guy. I think it'll be one of those ones where he enters Dragon Force, and then after that he's good. And it would be like when he fought Animus in Dragon Cry. He's just going to do a couple like cool melee attacks and then drop like a Crimson Exploding Flame Blade, not even using Purgatory, Slashing Dragon Fire and Dragon Force, and he just takes him out with his lowest level, or even maybe a roar. Maybe he ends up roaring so much that that would be cool. I would love to see, not like, I know there's going to be like some guy that's going to be like Dragon Ball. I'm thinking of like the Dragon Ball late, when you have like the beam that goes off the planet. I just want it to be those ones where you see it at a crazy large scale, just so it's like one of those like Brian can't eat enough, and you just see like this mass size like mega rocket, kind of like when Natsu defeated Alderaan, of like absurd flame just pillaring behind him. But Brian, like when Natsu ends up like smashing all his teeth, and you have like the whole part where he's like, oh yeah, how are you gonna figure out where Igni is if he can't talk? And Natsu's just like, that's a good point you got there. I love parts like that. That's very classic Natsu and Happy, and it does remind way back to at chapter 1, because we also had like a nice little callback to that when Happy's talking about dragon slaying magic and how Natsu's magic works. But like how you have moments like that when Happy is just like, Natsu, come on, like you're fucking this up just by like completely forgetting what you said 3 minutes ago. And like I said, trying to find out information on a guy, but then you end up breaking all his teeth so he can't talk. But Brian ends up getting his teeth back. He just regenerates them, and Natsu's pretty stoked, but like he just smashed his teeth again, and he's like, okay, we're good, you can still talk. So he knows as long as this guy is relatively conscious, then he can just get new teeth. So Natsu's just, I would assume, just going to keep just beating him until he doesn't want to fight anymore. Something like that. I mean, I would be cool if instead of something, like, it'd be really cool if Natsu just like completely just keeps bodying him until Brian gives up. But like at the same time, like Brian has been showing to actually be fairly well, and at least from what I've seen, and this is one of the reasons I do genuinely think that like Fire and Flames is in really high running for villain groups right now, is they all seem to go off of Igni in respect and admiration, and not just like fear. Because like, for example, the Espada really didn't, and I know there are exceptions, but like they more so feared Aizen instead of respected him. And I know there's value in that, but the better leaders, like you get more out of subordinates that love you than fear you. Because when they fear you, they'll look for their first opportunity to get rid of you, whereas if they love you, they'll die for you. And I think that that's just a very large difference when you have a character who is able to command a group of people through the vision or some form of common mentality of them. And that seems to be more so of what we have with Fire and Flames. We're still relatively early. I know that it's been like, I haven't made I know I skipped over the last review, just because, like I said, there wasn't a whole lot going on in terms of what I wanted to talk about in that chapter. I know they had like this really cool brandish panel where she shrunk down Ermina and like held it in her hand. That was pretty badass, but I'm like, I can't really talk about Brandish in a really cool scene for 15-20 minutes and Lucy smashing Mercphobia. Like, it was one of those ones where like I needed to talk like in the next chapter, because there was also like the idea is like when we left it, did Lucy like do it and then Mercphobia is just unconscious and like defeated, like she just 100-0'd him? Seemed more like she just kind of damaged him and like smashing the lacrima put him back in his senses, so he was just kind of fine after that. Like if he was still an enemy, he would have just gotten back up after that point and then went back to attacking, but he was no longer in control with the lacrima destroyed, so they didn't have to worry about that. But it's I like same thing with that too. I feel like with the other fights, we're going to be seeing this battle and then we're going to be moving into the other ones before we end up seeing really like I want to say like before we kind of get to the Ferris and Ignia fight, but I really want to see that after this, because that fight can be really cool and not even be one and done. Like you could just put it in there, start it up, do like 2 chapters on it, we start to go to the other fights, and then maybe every couple chapters we come back there for like 1 chapter, and then we go back to the other fights, and then for 2 or whatever chapters we come back, we're still here. I think it'd be really sick if we had something like that, like a really long running chapter, or not chapter, battle, where it's like in between each of the other Dragon God events, so you get like 2 chapters continuing the fight between the 2 of them, and it lasts a while, and it's just it would be one of those ones where it's really cool just seeing phases of their battle, especially if it was like, she's gonna start really busting out really cool moves. Because Ferris could do something that I've always wanted in the series, is like when you have a character who just has these spells in terms of quantity, not like you have like a type of magic that is more of like an archetype magic where it's like, celestial spirit magic, you have the keys, you know what I mean, where it's more of like, this is like the branch and class of magic that you pick, and you're going to be using this and developing techniques and from this style. But I know that there's just different kind of like ways that you can go about it. But I personally, I would really like to see where it almost lost my train of thought there. It's with this kind of character with Ferris, is that I've always wanted there to be a character that kind of just knows singular spells, like large scale spells. Like if a character showed up, they started busting out like Ars Magia, they busted out Ethereon, they're using like Abyss Break, where it's just these spells that exist as like, I've always kind of called them artillery spells, where they seem to just kind of exist on their own. Because you have spells like, you have like Aranometria and Godfried that are incantations, but they are for celestial spirit magic. So they are kind of like their own thing, kind of like within a category of magic. So kind of like with Ice Make Magic, you have Iced Shell, where it's just kind of separate from the branch, but it is within the overall archetype, and it's within it's like adjacent enough that it's kind of part of it. But we could get it with Ferris, where Ferris just starts using different spells from Zareth, or what? Because like I would assume that she knows a lot, if not all, of the spells from the Book of Zareth, and then has, similar to what we saw with the Erasion Sex, like spells developed of her own. Like she's probably gonna like bust out with Nemesis as like one of her early spells when Ignia shows up, which I think would be really cool. But other than that, like I said, this chapter I thought was really solid. It was like, the way that I could say it is like, I feel that this chapter, like the first couple pages, should have been added on to the last chapter, and it would have felt way more complete. And then this chapter literally just throw a couple more action pages in there, and that's what really could have separated. But I think it was more so because it was supposed to leave you off on the Aquarius cliffhanger, and then show you what was going, like, oh yeah, they know each other, and then it's like, okay, well, what's the plan with that? Why is that important? And cutting away right after we start to kind of like look at that question mark of Aquarius and Merc Phobia knowing each other, that clearly means that plot line is going to be important in some way, shape, or form. We just don't know to what extent. So right now, I would hope that we just kind of get more of this fight. And like I said, I'm hoping with what we've been seeing, Brian continues having a pretty good display. Right now, I don't imagine he's going to get crazy far with Natsu's forms unless he further pushes his dragon form, or if he ends up busting out something that is like a secret kind of thing in his magic, because we still don't know we don't know exactly what Brian's magic is exactly, and now it's buffed by being a dragon on top of that. And every single time that he further increases the dragonification process, his magic and just the capabilities with his magic on both a quantity, quality, and a reach scale, essentially everything about what he can do with that magic, it would just by default increase by becoming a dragon. It's just going to be him getting massive boost after boost per percentage until he gets 100% dragon. And I wish we had more of a demonstration, because from what we've seen, Dragon Force just based off each should be I don't know, some people are big on multipliers. This will be the last things I talk about. But just being above lost aspect, it should be several hundred times of a boost, which is consistent with a lot of displays we've seen in the series. And then with the full dragon, just from what we've seen, anytime anyone's ever turned into a full dragon, and the gaps of what the power output and the physical capabilities, their speed, it's very clear that the full dragon has to be at least another throw another 0 or 2 onto what being a dragon, Dragon Force was already capable of, because at that point your powers reach a full just the full capabilities of just becoming a dragon. And then at that point, you just seem to get more powerful by default of getting older. You just have a default across the board increase to all stats and physical capabilities. It's one of the reasons, obviously, why it's such a broken power in the series, because it's got such crazy roofs that you can achieve. But I don't know. We'll see with Brian. We'll see what the other not Dragon Eaters. I mean, yes, I do want to see what the Dragon Eaters are up to. I need to see what Diablos and co are happening, because I'm pretty sure that Urza is going to have to go there. I personally, if it wasn't for Aquarius stuff, I still think that Lucy should have went for Selene, because just based off of what we know about Celestial Spirit magic, is she should theoretically be able to close Selene's portals, because Anna was able to mess with the space between time. She only wasn't able to in full because Zareth was there, and Zareth obviously is Zareth, way higher capabilities, but she could close and mess with essentially a hole in reality. So I think portals across dimensions should be a lesser form than she should already know. And so something if Lucy was able to, not directly, but say every single time she would just have to summon a key, but instead her keys would summon right there or something. She'd have to do something really weird with the portals for it to kind of really work. But I'm pretty sure that Urza is going to be going there, and then they gotta have Gray against Alderaan. Because Vierna's, I will be surprised if Mishima sends anybody but Wendy for Vierna's. Because if Vierna's just turns back into a concept, then nobody should be able to really get him other than Wendy. But Wendy should theoretically still be able to do things just based off of what her enchantments are going to be able to do, with obviously the stuff like concept enchantments. But I feel like whoever else is going to be on her team is probably going to be somebody that's going to be really beneficial to her. And Gray with Alderaan, I really just want to have like Gray just pop off and do some crazy stuff. It's gonna be weird with Alderaan just because Alderaan is so big, but the God Seeds are gonna be really intriguing just to see how they're gonna operate and what they're gonna be doing. Well, anyway, other than that, comment below, tell me your thoughts are about this chapter, and tell me your thoughts are about like what's going on within the series. You know, are you happy with the whole events um with Aquarius's key now being relevant in apparently what's going on with Mercphobia? Are you a fan of Brian and just anything about like what's going on right now? Natsu's lines though were tough. I really like just how badass Natsu was in this in the chapter. And other than that, comment below, thumbs up the video, friendly like, subscribe, and check out my other videos. From there, I appreciate you guys subscribed, and thank you all for listening. Bye.